But Freddie had an amazing power of his vision, yes. I think he
Freddie Mercury was never short of brilliance. As the frontman of Queen, he delivered songs that blended power, theatricality, and raw emotion in ways no other rock vocalist could achieve. Yet, among the countless compositions that bear his mark, Brian May once singled out one in particular as the most beautiful Freddie Mercury ever wrote. That song was Somebody to Love.
It's easy to assume Freddie's most defining works would be the anthems that filled stadiums: Bohemian Rhapsody, We Will Rock You, Radio Gaga. But Somebody to Love was different. It wasn't just spectacle, it was sincerity, crafted with an intensity that revealed the personal struggles buried beneath Freddie's flamboyant stage persona. Brian May saw in it a depth that transcended rock music, something that sounded less like performance and more like confession. When Queen entered the studio in 1976 to record the album A Day at the Races, they were coming off the monumental success of A Night at the Opera. That earlier record had catapulted them into global superstardom, yet with success came pressure. How could they follow up an album that had produced a cultural phenomenon like Bohemian Rhapsody? For Freddie, the challenge was not to repeat himself, but to push further. He wanted something grand but grounded, something theatrical yet deeply human.
The idea of Somebody to Love grew out of his admiration for gospel and soul. Freddie was a devoted fan of Aretha Franklin, and he wanted to capture some of the same passion she delivered in her performances. But where Franklin's gospel was rooted in faith, Freddie's was a desperate search for connection. In the lyrics, he didn't write about divine salvation. He wrote about loneliness, yearning, and the painful hunt for companionship. It was Freddie at his most exposed, stripping away the mask of showmanship to reveal his private torment.
The recording sessions were brutal. Freddie, May, and Roger Taylor layered their vocals again and again to create the illusion of a full gospel choir. John Deacon's bass anchored the entire song with a steady groove, while Brian May's guitar added restrained but sharp counterpoints. The track became one of Queen's most complex studio creations, not far from the painstaking work that had gone into Bohemian Rhapsody. But unlike that operatic experiment, Somebody to Love was fueled not by ambition for grandeur, but by raw emotional urgency.
Inside the studio, tensions were high. Freddie pushed the band relentlessly, demanding take after take, harmony after harmony. His pursuit of perfection clashed at times with the patience of the others, but he was unyielding. This wasn't just another Queen track. It was, for him, something deeply personal. Brian May later recalled that what Freddie brought to this song was unlike anything else. It wasn't about flamboyant artistry, it was about honesty. For Brian, who had watched Freddie evolve from a flamboyant art student into one of rock's greatest frontmen, this song stood out as the closest Freddie had come to revealing his soul through music. May had always respected Freddie's genius, but with Somebody to Love, he saw something that went beyond genius. He saw fragility. He saw the man behind the performer.
The song resonated because it captured Freddie's reality in 1976. Queen were global stars, but fame did not erase loneliness. Freddie was living a double life, outwardly flamboyant and larger than life, inwardly battling isolation. His relationships were fractured, his identity complex, and the pressures of stardom only intensified his struggles. In Somebody to Love, he poured those contradictions into melody and harmony. Every note was a plea, every crescendo a cry. When the song was released as a single in November 1976, it immediately connected with audiences. It climbed to number 2 on the UK singles chart and became one of the band's most beloved tracks. In America, it cracked the Billboard Top 20, further cementing Queen's global presence.
Yet beyond the charts, it left a different kind of mark. Listeners felt its desperation, its humanity. Even without knowing the details of Freddie's private life, they sensed its urgency. On stage, the song took on a life of its own. Freddie turned it into a centerpiece of Queen's live shows, commanding the audience with his unparalleled vocal range and energy. Night after night, he belted out the soaring lines with a conviction that made stadiums feel like intimate confessionals. Brian May, standing beside him, knew he was witnessing something rare, a performer capable of blending virtuosity with vulnerability. But there was irony. The more Freddie bared his soul in Somebody to Love, the more he concealed it in public. Offstage, he remained guarded. He avoided interviews that probed too deeply into his personal struggles. He built walls of flamboyance and charisma around himself. The honesty that came through in the song was honesty he rarely allowed outside the music. For Brian May, that's what made it so beautiful. It was Freddie letting his guard down, if only for a few minutes of music. In later years, May would talk about the challenges of working with Freddie, about the conflicts that arose in the band, about the excesses and the chaos. But when he reflected on Somebody to Love, he spoke of admiration. He saw in it a side of Freddie he cherished, vulnerable, searching, human. The legacy of the song only grew after Freddie's death in 1991. When George Michael performed Somebody to Love at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert in 1992, even Brian May acknowledged that Michael had captured something true to Freddie's spirit. It was a moment that underscored the timelessness of the song, proving it wasn't just about Freddie's personal struggles. It was about the universal human condition. Everyone could relate to the longing at its core. But make no mistake, while others could sing it, no one could own it like Freddie. He wrote it from the heart, and that's why it carried such weight. It wasn't a stylistic exercise or a commercial calculation. It was him, raw and unfiltered, dressed in the clothes of gospel and rock. What Brian May saw in Somebody to Love was not just technical mastery or innovation. He saw Freddie's humanity. The man who dazzled the world with costumes and spectacle was, at his core, someone aching for connection like anyone else. And for all the glory of Queen's catalog, this was the song where that truth rang clearest. Even now, decades later, when fans revisit Somebody to Love, they hear more than music. They hear Freddie Mercury bearing his soul in a way he rarely allowed. They hear the sound of a genius wrestling with loneliness. They hear a man searching, yearning, hoping. And they understand why Brian May would call it the most beautiful song Freddie ever wrote. Because beauty in this case wasn't about polish or perfection or grandeur. It was about honesty. It was about a song that came directly from the heart of one of rock's most complex figures. And in the end, that honesty is what has allowed Somebody to Love to endure, not just as a Queen classic, but as one of the most powerful songs of its time.
Freddie Mercury left behind a catalog of iconic music, from arena anthems to ballads that defined eras. But Somebody to Love remains singular. It is the song where the mask slipped, where the performer became the man, and where that man revealed his deepest longing. For Brian May, and for countless listeners, that is why it stands as Freddie's most beautiful creation.